The train station was crowded, noisy, and full of life. People rushed in every direction, some dragging heavy suitcases, some sipping coffee, some just sitting and waiting with tired eyes. Announcements echoed through the space every few minutes, naming arriving and departing trains, but hardly anyone paid attention unless their train was mentioned. Street musicians played near the entrances, their music mixing with the footsteps, chatter, and rumbling trains. Among the sea of strangers, no one noticed an old man slowly walking through the station. He looked like just another tired traveler. His coat was oversized and a little worn at the sleeves. His hat was pulled down low, almost covering his eyes. His shoes had seen many winters. The leather cracked, the color faded. He carried no bags, only a small notebook tucked into the inside of his coat. His back was slightly bent, and his steps were slow but steady. To the people around him he seemed ordinary, maybe even poor. No one gave him a second glance. But this man wasn't just anyone. His name was Alexander Morrow, one of the richest and most private men in the world. Decades ago, his face had appeared in newspapers and business magazines. He had once been the young genius who built an empire in technology and finance, turning a tiny startup into a global powerhouse. But after his wife's death many years ago, he had disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no photographs, no social media. Some people believed he had moved abroad. Others thought he had died. In truth, he had simply walked away from the noise of the world. Alexander had spent years traveling quietly, staying in small towns, reading books, and visiting places that reminded him of his younger days. He had all the money in the world, but lived like someone who had nothing left to prove. His clothes were simple, his meals small, his days quiet. He talked to few people. He answered to no one. He lived in silence, not because he had to, but because that silence gave him peace. But today was different. Today, something inside him had pulled him toward this train station. He didn't know exactly why. He had passed this place before, many times in fact, but had never stayed long. Yet that morning, when he woke up in his small apartment just 2 streets away, he felt a strange heaviness in his heart, and also a soft pull, like someone calling him. He reached into his coat and took out the notebook. Inside, between its pages, was a folded piece of old music paper. The edges were torn, the ink had faded in some places, but the melody was still readable. He had carried it with him for years, but he had never played it in public. That song wasn't just a piece of music to him. It was a memory, a message, a part of his soul. It was written by his wife, Lillian, during the final weeks of her life. She had been a brilliant pianist and composer, full of energy, creativity, and laughter. Even when she fell ill, she never stopped making music. She used to say, "Music is the only way I know how to tell the truth." That particular song was the last thing she ever played. She had named it "For the Days That Never Came." It was soft, slow, and full of longing. When she played it for the first time, tears had filled her eyes, and she had said, "One day, I want you to play this where people need to hear it, where life is loud and no one stops to feel." Alexander had promised her that he would, but after she died, he couldn't bring himself to do it. The piano in their home stayed closed. The notes felt too heavy. Years passed. The world changed. But the song, her song, stayed with him, folded in that little notebook like a quiet promise waiting to be fulfilled. And now, standing in the middle of the busy station, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. An old upright piano sitting near one of the main platforms. It had chipped paint and was slightly out of tune, but it was open and waiting. No one was playing it. A little sign above the keys read, "Play me." Alexander walked toward it slowly, heart beating, faster with each step. The bench creaked as he sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys, unsure at first. Around him people walked by, hardly noticing him. A child tugged at his mother's coat nearby. A man coughed into his phone. A woman scrolled through her emails, unaware of the moment that was about to happen. Alexander took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. Then his fingers began to move. The first few notes were gentle, uncertain, almost whisper-like. But soon the melody began to grow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was soft, like a voice from a dream. The tune rose and fell like waves, each note carefully shaped by memory and emotion. It was a kind of music that didn't ask for attention. It simply offered itself. It wasn't meant to impress, but to touch. At first, no one noticed. People walked past, lost in their own worlds. But music has a strange power. It can reach into hearts without permission. It can make people feel something they didn't expect to feel. A little girl holding her father's hand stopped and turned. Her eyes grew wide. A man on a bench nearby looked up from his newspaper. A teenage boy pulled out one earbud and listened. Slowly, like ripples in a pond, the music began to pull people in. Alexander didn't open his eyes. He didn't look up. He was somewhere else, back in a small living room with Lillian, her hands over his as they played together. He remembered her laughter, her voice, the way her fingers moved across the piano like they were dancing. He remembered the hospital room, the soft smell of lavender, the last time she held his hand. Each note he played now carried a piece of her love, her pain, her goodbye. He had played for only a few minutes, but in that short time, the world around him had changed. The station was still busy, still full of people rushing to trains and appointments, but something deeper had settled in the air. A stillness. Some stood quietly, listening. Others closed their eyes, letting the melody take them somewhere. Personal. A lost memory. A hidden grief. A quiet joy. A woman wiped away a tear without knowing why. A security guard leaned against a pillar and sighed. Even those who didn't stop completely seemed to walk a little slower, their expressions softer. Alexander knew this feeling. He had seen it once before, long ago when Lillian played in small concerts, not for fame, but to heal. She had always believed that music was like medicine for the heart. And now, as he played her final song in the middle of a busy station, he realized that he was finally keeping his promise. When the last note faded, he didn't wait. He stood up, placed his hand gently on the piano as if thanking it, and turned to leave. People looked at him now. Some tried to speak, but he gave a small nod, his eyes kind but unreadable. He didn't want attention. He had come for one reason, only to let her song be heard. As he walked away back into the crowd, he felt lighter. The music had left his hands, but it had reached where it needed to go. He didn't know that someone had recorded the moment on their phone. He didn't care. He had done what he came to do. And for the first time in many years, as he stepped out of the station and into the evening light, he smiled. He was no longer just a man with a heavy heart and a folded piece of music. He was a messenger, a keeper of a promise, a husband who had finally said goodbye in the only way that truly mattered. And somewhere, somehow, he hoped that Lillian had heard the song, and that she had smiled too. The piano stood silently near platform 6. It was old, with scratches on the wooden surface and a few stains along the side that no one had ever cleaned properly. The bench wobbled slightly when someone sat on it. Most of the time, it was used by children who pounded the keys for fun, or by travelers who had nothing better to do during a long wait. People rarely stopped to listen. They were too busy looking at their phones or rushing to catch their trains. The piano had become like an old sign on a wall. There, but forgotten. Even when someone played well, hardly anyone paid attention. The sound was often drowned out by the loudspeakers announcing train arrivals and departures. In a place where noise never stopped, the soft voice of music didn't stand a chance. It was a background sound. Something extra, not something. That mattered. No one expected magic to come from that tired old piano. It had been ignored for so long that even the piano seemed tired of hoping. But then the old man came. At first, nothing about him seemed special. He looked like he didn't belong in such a busy place. People around him wore suits or carried new luggage. He wore a long coat that had lost its shape and shoes that looked like they'd walked through every season. His face was partly hidden under a cap, and his eyes stayed down. He looked like someone who had been forgotten by the world. Or maybe someone who had chosen to forget the world himself. He sat at the piano slowly, almost like he was unsure whether he should be there at all. A group of teenagers nearby laughed, nudging each other when they saw him take his seat. One of them joked loudly, "Here comes another Mozart." A man in a hurry nearly bumped into him without saying sorry. A little girl pointed and whispered something to her mother, who quickly pulled her away. No one expected him to play anything worth listening to. They thought he might just press a few keys randomly, or maybe pretend to be playing, but then his hands moved, gently, like he was touching something delicate and precious. The first notes that came out were soft and simple. It wasn't the kind of music that shouted. It didn't try to impress, it just began, like a whisper in a loud room, like a candle flickering in a storm. Quiet, but steady. At first, almost no one noticed. The crowd moved like it always did, fast and with purpose. Shoes clicked against the floor, wheels rolled over tiles, and voices filled the air. But slowly the notes started to slip through the noise. Like water through cracks, they found their way into people's ears. A man reading a newspaper turned a page, then paused. His eyes didn't move to the next article. He looked up. A woman sipping coffee stopped mid-sip, holding her cup in the air for a second too long. A boy with headphones around his neck took them off and looked toward the piano. Something was happening, though no one could explain what it was. The melody was unfamiliar. It wasn't a famous song. It wasn't fast or dramatic. But it had something in it. Something that made people feel. It spoke a language that needed no words. Each note seemed to come from somewhere deep. There was sadness in it, but also warmth. There was loneliness, but also love. It was a song of remembering, a song of letting go, a song of everything in between. As the music continued, more people began to notice. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And when something true is spoken, even through music, the world listens. A young woman with a backpack stopped near the bench. She stood perfectly still, her eyes shining as if the notes had opened a door to a memory she had kept locked away. An elderly man who had been walking with a cane stopped to lean against a pillar, tears welling up in his eyes. Two lovers, holding hands, slowed their steps, their smiles fading into something deeper. A quiet understanding between hearts. A child climbed onto her father's lap and rested her head on his shoulder, as if the music had gently asked her to be still. A station cleaner paused with his mop, closing his eyes for just a moment. Even the pigeons walking near the platform seemed calmer. No one knew who the old man was. No one knew what the song was called or where it had come from. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The music had become something shared. It wasn't about the man playing anymore. It was about what he was giving. He was offering pieces of himself, his joy, his pain, his memories, without asking anything in return. And though he looked tired and quiet, the way his fingers moved across the keys showed strength. Not the strength of muscles, but the strength of someone who had carried sorrow for a long time and still chose to be kind. His hands didn't shake. They didn't hesitate. They knew every note by heart. One of the security guards nearby had been watching from a distance. He wasn't supposed to stop his patrol, but he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening. His mind drifted to his brother who had passed away 2 years earlier. He had never cried at the funeral. He had stayed strong for his family. But now, as the music filled the air, tears rolled down his cheeks quietly, unnoticed by those around him. The teenagers who had laughed earlier were still there. But now they stood silently, the joke gone from their faces. One of them pulled out his phone and began recording. Not to mock, but because something in him told him that this was a moment he might want to remember. A moment that didn't happen every day. And in the middle of it all, the man kept playing. He wasn't showing off. He didn't even look up. His eyes remained closed, his face peaceful, though there was a kind of sadness there too. It was the sadness of someone who had lost something they could never get back, but had found a way to honor it. He didn't know how many people were watching. He didn't know that his music was causing strangers to stop and cry. He only knew that he had come to do what he had promised someone he loved. And so he played on. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, tugged on his mother's coat and asked softly, "Why is the man making the piano cry?" The mother didn't know how to answer. She just held him close and listened. The station around them didn't stop. Trains came and went. Announcements still echoed overhead. People still boarded and exited. But for many, time felt slower. The world felt gentler. The music had done something unusual. It had reminded them that they were human, that beneath all the schedules, responsibilities, and distractions, they still had hearts that could feel. When the final notes were played, there was no applause, not because it wasn't deserved, but because no one wanted to break the spell. People remained silent. Some smiled, some cried. Others simply stood there, not sure what to do next. The man lifted his hands from the keys and placed them gently on his lap. He opened his eyes and looked down, not at the people, but at the piano, as if saying, "Thank you." Then he stood slowly and walked away without a word. No dramatic exit, no bow, just a quiet step back into the crowd. Some followed, him with their eyes, but no one called out. It felt wrong to disturb him. It felt better to hold on to the music he had given and let him go. The piano stood alone again, but it wasn't the same. The air around it felt changed. It had become something more than just an old instrument in a busy place. It had been part of something beautiful, something real. And though the man disappeared into the crowd, his music remained. People spoke to each other softly, shared looks with strangers, and even smiled at one another. Something had happened. Something they might not be able to explain, but would never forget. Later, some would say it was the most beautiful thing they had ever heard. Others would say it reminded them of someone they loved. And for a long time, people would return to that spot in the station, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the old man would return and play again. But whether he did or not, didn't matter as much, because the gift he left behind, a moment of stillness, of feeling, of truth, stayed long after the notes had faded, and the piano, once forgotten, waited patiently for the next story to be told through its keys. The video didn't seem special at first. It was shaky, taken from a mobile phone by a teenager who wasn't sure why he was even recording it. In the background you could hear the usual sounds of a train station, announcements echoing, people talking, suitcases rolling. But in the center of that noise was something soft and powerful. A quiet old man, hunched over a worn-out public piano, playing a song no one had heard before. The music wasn't fast or full of big, showy notes. It was slow and emotional, like a story told without words. The teenager uploaded the video to a social media site that same evening. He didn't write a long caption. Just, "I don't know who this man is, but his music made my mom cry in the middle of the station." For a while, it got no attention. Just a few likes from friends and a couple of heart emojis. But then, someone shared it. Then another. And another. Within hours, the video began to spread like fire on dry grass. People who had never met the old man were now talking about him. Strangers commented that the music had touched something deep inside them, even through a screen. Some said it reminded them of someone they lost. Others said they didn't even know why they were crying. They just were. The man's name wasn't mentioned. He had never introduced himself. No one knew who he was, where he came from, or where he went. That mystery only made people more curious. By morning, the video had millions of views. Online platforms were flooded with the same question. Who is the man at the piano? News reporters picked up the story. They played short clips on TV. Headlines read things like, "Mysterious old man leaves station in tears with heartbreaking melody," and internet searches for unknown piano angel. Some stations tried to trace the video back to the person who recorded it. They found the teenager who had posted it and interviewed him. He only said, "I was messing around, but then I stopped. I just couldn't stop listening. It was like he was playing straight into my chest." The search for the old man began. Security footage was checked. People zoomed in on the video, trying to read the brand on his coat or guess his age from the lines on his face. A few people even claimed they knew him: a retired music teacher, a former concert pianist, an old veteran. But none of the stories matched. The man had appeared, played something unforgettable, and then vanished like smoke in the wind. Meanwhile, Alexander Morrow sat quietly in a small rented room just 2 blocks away from the station. He had no idea that the world had started looking for him. He didn't have a television. He didn't use the internet. His phone was an old flip model that could barely send a text. After playing the song, he had returned home, placed his notebook gently on the table, and sat by the window. He spent most of his day in silence, as always. Occasionally, he would read, drink tea, or go for a walk. He had lived that way for many years, never needing more. But something had shifted inside him since the moment he played the piano. He didn't regret doing it. In fact, he felt lighter. Still, the memory of the music, of Lillian's song, stayed with him. He could still feel the weight of the keys beneath his fingers, the way the final note had echoed gently before fading. He hadn't looked up while playing, so he didn't realize how many people had gathered. He hadn't seen their tears. He hadn't seen how still the station had become. He only knew that he had kept a promise. That was enough for him. That night, as he lay on his small bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind full of images from the past. He thought of the first time he met Lillian, how she had laughed at his clumsy attempt to fix a broken bench outside the music hall. He remembered how she played the piano like it was a part of her body. Her heart poured into every note, and he remembered the last time he saw her, pale, tired, but smiling, asking him to keep the song safe. In another part of the city, people were still watching the video, listening to the music, and crying quietly in their homes. Some opened their own dusty pianos for the first time in years. Others called family members they hadn't spoken to in a long time. A woman even said the music stopped her from ending her life. She had been sitting in her car, lost in hopeless thoughts, when the video popped up on her phone. She clicked it out of boredom. But the music stopped her, like a hand reaching out from the dark. She cried for an hour and then drove home instead. Music had done something no words could. Even the station workers noticed the change. The next day, more people came to visit the piano. Some played soft songs, trying to copy the feeling the old man had left behind. Others simply sat on the bench, closed their eyes, and remembered. Flowers appeared next to the piano. A small card was taped to the side that read, "To the man who reminded us how to feel, thank you." Someone even brought a frame with the words, "Play me like you mean it." The piano had become more than just a forgotten instrument. It had become a place of peace. Days passed. The video was everywhere. Music experts tried to analyze the melody. It didn't match any known song. One music professor said, "Whoever wrote this knows pain and beauty. This song is like a letter to someone they loved deeply." Another said, "It's not technically perfect, but that's what makes it human. That's what makes it unforgettable." People began calling the song the station melody. Others named it the old man's lullaby. But no one knew the real title. No one knew that it was called For the Days That Never Came. No one knew it was written by a dying woman, composed with trembling fingers, played only once before by the man who loved her. Then one morning, Alexander stepped outside to buy tea from the little shop downstairs. As he waited for his order, he heard something strange. The shopkeeper was playing a video on his phone, the very same video of him at the piano. Alexander froze. He watched as his own hands appeared on the tiny screen, heard the first few notes of the song. The image was shaky, but clear enough. It was him. People had been filming. They had been watching. His heart pounded. The shopkeeper, seeing his face, smiled and said, "Beautiful, isn't it? Someone really played their soul into that piano." Alexander nodded silently and took his tea. He walked home slowly, his hands shaking slightly. The quiet life he had built, the hidden world he had created for himself, was no longer invisible. He sat down at his window again and thought about what to do. For years he had avoided the spotlight. He didn't want fame or attention. He just wanted peace. But now people were searching for him, not to take something from him, but because they had been touched. They had felt something real, and they wanted to thank the man who gave it to them. That night he opened his notebook and stared at the sheet music Lillian had written. His fingers brushed over the paper gently. For the first time, he wondered if maybe this wasn't just about keeping a promise. Maybe it was about passing something on, about allowing others to feel what he and Lillian had once shared. The next day he walked back to the station. He wore the same coat, the same shoes. But this time, people noticed him. Whispers spread as he approached the piano. Phones came out, some clapped, others just stood in silent respect. He sat down just like before and placed his hands on the keys. This time, when he played, he didn't close his eyes. He looked up at the people around him, at their tears, their smiles, their stillness, and he realized something. This wasn't about being known. It was about connecting, about reminding people that even in a loud, fast world, there was still room for softness, for truth. And as the music filled the station once again, Alexander Morrow, the hidden tycoon, felt more seen, more human, than he had in all his years of building empires and hiding from the world. He was no longer just a man who kept a promise. He was now part of something much bigger. A quiet movement that started with a single song and a single moment of courage. And around him, people listened, feeling something they couldn't explain, carried away by a melody that spoke of love, loss, and the beauty of remembering. After Alexander played at the station for the second time, something changed forever. His face, once unknown to the world, was now everywhere. Newspapers printed his photo on the front page. Television channels ran his story again and again. People started calling him the piano man of the station, but they still didn't know his real name. That was something he hadn't shared, and he wasn't sure he ever would. When Alexander walked back home from the station, something felt different. People on the street smiled at him, nodded, and even whispered quietly to each other after he passed by. He was no longer invisible. He didn't know if he liked that. He had spent so many years living quietly, hiding his true identity. But now, the wall he had built around his life had cracks in it, and sunlight was starting to come through. At home, he stared at the window like he always did. The piano at the station had brought back feelings he thought he had buried a long time ago. The memories of Lillian, the love they had, and the pain of losing her. They all came back stronger after that second performance. He hadn't planned to go back and play again. But the moment he heard the video at the tea shop, something in him stirred. It was like her voice calling him again, like she was asking him to share her song with the world. A few days later, he received his first letter. It was slipped under the door of his apartment. The envelope was simple. No name, no return address. Just a soft paper with a short note. Whoever you are, thank you. Your music helped me say goodbye to my father. I will never forget it. That letter was the first. Then more came, slipped under his door, left on the stairway, or placed at the piano in the station. Some were long, full of stories about loss, about love, about family. Others were just a few lines. But they all had one thing in common. They had been touched by the music, and they wanted to thank him for bringing it to life. He read every single one. He started keeping them in a wooden box next to the window. That box slowly filled up over the next few weeks. One day he noticed that someone had left a small notebook beside the piano. On the cover it said, "For the players." Inside, people had started writing little messages about how the music made them feel, about why they came back to sit and listen, about the memories it brought. Some even wrote songs or poems. Alexander read them all quietly one morning when no one was around. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. He didn't cry, but something heavy moved inside his chest. He still hadn't told anyone who he really was. He didn't want to be known as a tycoon or a rich man. That life was behind him. He had built companies, made money, attended powerful meetings. But those things never made him feel like this, never made him feel connected to people in such a deep, human way. What surprised him most was how people started opening their hearts, not just to him, but to each other. A young girl began playing soft lullabies every evening at the piano. She didn't speak much, but she played beautifully. A boy who had once lived on the streets came to sit quietly nearby every day, his eyes closed as if the music gave him peace. An old man brought a folding chair and just listened for hours, nodding along with every note. The station had changed. It was no longer just a place for rushing trains and loud announcements. It had become something else, almost like a small chapel made of noise and feeling. People came just to feel something. And all of it started with one man, one song, and one moment of courage. But not everyone understood. One morning, while Alexander was playing, a group of people gathered nearby, not to listen, but to ask questions. A reporter came forward and gently asked, "Sir, are you the man from the video?" Alexander didn't stop playing, but he gave a small nod. The reporter smiled and said, "People would love to know more. Your story could inspire millions." Alexander looked at him and simply said, "It's not about me. It's about the music." The reporter left quietly, respecting his words. But the world doesn't always let a mystery stay a mystery. A few online users started digging. They zoomed into the video, studied his face, and searched old photos from business conferences. Slowly a name surfaced: Alexander Morrow, billionaire, former CEO, investor, disappeared from public life over 10 years ago. When the news broke, the internet exploded again. People were shocked. The quiet, humble piano man was actually one of the richest men in the country. Some were amazed. Others were confused. Why would a man like that be sitting at a public piano in a train station? Why would someone so powerful hide his name? Headlines changed overnight. Now they read things like "Billionaire in Disguise," "The Secret Life of Alexander Morrow," and "From Fortune to Feeling, Tycoon's Piano Performance Melts Millions." Journalists started showing up near the station. Cameras appeared. Reporters tried to talk to him. Some even followed him home. Alexander didn't say much. He simply returned to his small apartment and locked the door. He wasn't angry, just tired. He had shared something personal, something real, and now the world wanted to turn it into a show. That was never his intention. He just wanted people to feel something, to remember what mattered. money, power, fame. He had known all of that. But none of it had ever made him feel as alive as he did when he pressed his fingers on the piano and brought Lillian's music to life. He stayed inside for a few days. He stopped going to the station. The piano sat quietly in the corner, collecting dust again. People noticed. Messages started appearing in the notebook again, this time asking, "Where did he go?" And, "Please come back. The music isn't the same without you." Someone even drew a sketch of him and wrote, "We miss you." He read those messages. He stayed up late thinking about them. And then, after a week, he made a decision. He would return, but on his own terms. He arrived at the station early one morning, before the crowd. In his hands was a small black case. He opened it at the bench and pulled out sheet music, the original handwritten score from Lillian. Then he sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. This time, the melody was slightly different, still soft, still emotional, but fuller. He had added something, a second part, a new voice in the song. As the music rose, people began to arrive. They didn't cheer or clap. They just stood quietly, feeling the weight of the moment. At the end of the piece, Alexander stood up. He turned to the people and finally spoke. "My name is Alexander Morrow," he said. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is this music. It was written by someone I loved dearly. She's gone now, but her spirit is in every note. I played it to keep her alive. I played it for myself. But I never expected so many of you would feel it too. That means more to me than you'll ever know." There was silence, and then gentle applause. Not wild or loud, just warm and thankful. From that day on, Alexander returned to the station regularly. But now, he wasn't alone. Other musicians joined him. Some brought violins. Some played flutes or cellos. The area around the piano turned into a place of beauty, of open hearts and shared feelings. And Alexander, the once hidden tycoon, became not a symbol of money or success, but of honesty, emotion, and quiet strength. He didn't go back to his old life. He didn't open new companies or give big speeches. He stayed in his small apartment, lived simply, and shared the music. Years later, people would still tell the story about the man who sat at the piano, not for attention or fame, but to honor love. About how one melody turned a busy station into a place of reflection and peace. About how sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply feel and help others feel too. And Alexander Morrow, who once ruled boardrooms and stock markets, found his greatest joy not in building empires, but in building moments of truth, one note at a time. After Alexander Morrow made his heartfelt speech at the train station and began playing the piano openly, his life slowly changed in ways he had never imagined. People no longer saw him just as a mysterious man with an incredible talent. They began to see the real person behind the music, a man who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and found a way to share his feelings with the world. At first, the crowds that gathered were small, mostly curious strangers and a few regular commuters who stopped to listen on their way to work. But day by day, more and more people came. Some brought friends, others brought their children. The station's piano became a symbol of hope and healing. It was no longer just an instrument in a busy place, but a source of comfort, a quiet spot where anyone could pause, breathe, and feel something real. Alexander noticed how the music was changing the atmosphere around the station. He saw a tired mother holding her baby close, tears silently streaming down her face. He noticed a teenage boy, rough and tough on the outside, wiping away a tear as he listened. Old couples sat hand in hand, whispering memories to each other. The piano was bringing strangers together, helping them find a moment of peace in a noisy world. He started to understand the true power of music, not just as entertainment, but as a bridge between hearts. One day a woman approached him after he finished playing. She introduced herself as Emma, a music therapist who worked with people struggling with grief and trauma. She told Alexander how deeply moved she was by the song he played, the way it seemed to speak to the broken parts inside people. She asked if he would consider helping her bring music to others who needed healing. Alexander was surprised but agreed. He knew what it meant to carry pain in silence. For years he had kept his grief locked away, hidden behind a successful career and a calm face. Now he wanted to help others find a way to express their feelings, just like he had through the piano. Together they started organizing small music therapy sessions in the station's waiting rooms. Volunteers joined them, musicians, counselors, and everyday people who believed in the healing power of music. Slowly, the station became more than a transit point. It became a community space where people could come to heal, to share stories, to cry, and to laugh. Alexander's own life began to fill with new meaning. He spent his days traveling quietly through the city, visiting hospitals, shelters, and schools. He brought his piano with him sometimes, or simply listened as others played. He didn't talk much about his past wealth or his former life in the business world. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the music. One afternoon, Alexander was invited to speak at a small gathering of people who had been helped by the music sessions. A young woman named Sophie, who had lost her brother in an accident, shared her story. She said the music gave her hope when everything else felt dark and empty. Another man, a war veteran named Carlos, talked about how the melodies reminded him that he was not alone, even in his deepest struggles. Hearing their stories made Alexander feel something he hadn't in years, a connection so strong it brought tears to his eyes. He realized that the music was not just his story or Lillian's song anymore. It had become a language that anyone could understand, a language of love, loss, and healing. As time went on, the story of the Piano Man spread beyond the city. News outlets and social media shared updates about the healing programs Alexander helped create. Musicians from other places reached out, offering to join the cause or start similar projects in their own communities. The simple act of playing a piano in a busy train station had grown into a movement, one that touched thousands of lives. Despite the growing attention, Alexander stayed humble and grounded. He never sought fame or recognition. He simply wanted to keep playing, keep sharing, and keep helping. Every note he played was a tribute to Lillian and to everyone who had ever felt lost or alone. One evening, as the sun set and the station grew quieter, Alexander sat down at the piano for one last song. This time, it was a new piece he had composed, a gentle, hopeful melody that spoke of new beginnings. As his fingers danced softly over the keys, he thought about the journey he had taken, from a powerful tycoon hiding from the world to a man who found strength in vulnerability and connection. Around him the station was calm. A few people sat, nearby, listening. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Alexander smiled quietly, feeling a deep peace inside. He knew that the music would live on even after he was gone. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the busiest, most crowded places, there was always room for kindness, for feeling, and for healing. And in that moment, Alexander understood something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest power in the world is not money or success, but a simple song played from the heart.